Okay, welcome listeners to our next iteration of Coffee with Cow podcast. My name is Chris Lawler. I'm the CEO of Learn International. We're a boutique provider based in Ireland, offering programming in Ireland, UK, continental Europe, and Australia and New Zealand, and Southeast Asia. We decided to establish this podcast to facilitate a conversation and to understand, what has happened in individual offices to individual stakeholders, how they have gone through the crisis so far and what their plans are coming into the new normal afterwards. But not just that, we don't want it to focus entirely on that. What we want to be able to do is just to have kind of an ear to the ground in terms of international education as a whole, and get people's thoughts on whatever it is that's really kind of interesting them at this time, and see where it takes us. The name of the podcast was born out of Cow, which is our lovable mascot. Is the most traveled cow in the world, I believe, and that's an important thing to note, given that there is no cow behind me here and there can be misconceptions. So let's not have any misconceptions. Secondly, I would like to introduce our participant today. Adriana Smith is the Assistant Director of International Programs at Presbyterian College in South Carolina. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Chris, for inviting me.
Well, it's great to get a chance to chat again. Initially when I was starting the podcast, so we would just launch straight into it. But I think having that initial chat first is really helpful to kind of frame things and talk a little bit about it. As long as you don't lose your notes from that chat, you're doing well. So let's move on. So tell me a little bit about how you got to be in Presbyterian. In a small little town in South Carolina. I remember the first time driving through and coming around the corner and just driving up towards the campus, and it just kind of opens out in front of you, and it's a distinct difference between one street to the next, which happens a lot, I suppose, with small college towns, but a great place. So tell us how you managed to get there, and how has your career taken you there so far?
Yes, so I couldn't imagine being here at Presbyterian College, let alone in South Carolina. And so it actually goes back more than 4 years ago, about 6 years ago, when I had the opportunity of getting an internship with Go Abroad. And Go Abroad is kind of like the Google for all international experiences. And so I was lucky enough to get a summer internship with the company. And once I was there, I fell in love with study abroad. And it's funny because I had study abroad and when I was a junior or sophomore in college. And I should have known that I love travel and I love, exploring the world and seeing the world, but it didn't dawn on me that international education was a field until that internship would Go Abroad. And so 6 weeks into the program, this is what I have to do full time. And so after that, it took me about 2 years to get my foot in the door. And that actually happened when I met Liz Dilly, shout out to her, when we kind of ran into each other at a local restaurant at the NAFSA conference in Denver. And she just invited me over to her table. She didn't know me at all from a can of paint. And she just offered some advice. She also brought up an opportunity in her office. And so I'm just shaking my head and I'm thinking about all the things, I'm excited about to work in the international education field and in the study abroad office. And so immediately after the conference, I typed up my resume and my cover letter, sent it over to her. And then a few months later, I just arrived at I got the position as intern in her office. So I packed up everything, left my full-time job in Miami, and then I came straight to South Carolina. And I really didn't know where I was coming. I'm a city girl, so I didn't know I was coming to a town of about 8,500 people. I'm coming from a city of millions. And so when I arrived here, I got off the interstate, I passed a grave on my right side. I'm like, okay, I don't know where I'm going, but I continued on and it got beautiful, more and more beautiful as I got closer to campus. And so with all this nature and this green, I'm like, wow, I'm finally here. I'm finally in the door where I can talk about and encourage students to study abroad. And since then, I've loved it ever since.
That's amazing to see the change is mirrored in your life, where you're leaving, a full-time employment plus this city environment, and everything is changing in the space of a couple of days. That's fantastic. And so, how did you progress then from intern up to assistant director in the office?
So it was about, I want to say 9 months into my internship, Liz was planning to move out to another institution in another role. And so I approached the director and I told him that I was interested. And so that just moved into, interviews and making sure I was the right fit for the office. And then I transitioned a couple months later as full-time assistant director of international programs. And I knew the office, I knew the students, I knew the systems, the model in our office, and I was able to replicate it from what Liz taught me and developed me to be for the office. And so it was a smooth transition and I've loved it. My plan was to originally stay a year, but I've been here, I'm going on 4 years. That's including the year I was intern. And it's been an amazing experience because I've learned so much, not only in IE, but also about myself as a person and also professionally, and some things that have come up that I really, really cherish. And one thing that surprised me is working with international students. I solely wanted to work on the education abroad side, but having the international students as part of my job really opened my eyes to the world, like even more than when I studied abroad, like seeing students from Japan and China and South Korea and all over Africa and Europe and South America. It brought kind of like this own little world to my office. And I appreciated that so much because we talk about cross-cultural communication, internationalization, and that's what it was in my office. And if I could just capture it in a video or capture it and show you what it is, it'll be a beautiful moment of you seeing all these people from different worlds come together in one space.
I remember talking about probably 10 or 12 podcasts ago about a time where myself and my wife, Cara Simon, who runs the business with me, were in Nelson Mandela University in Port Elizabeth, and we were lucky enough to be there, I guess, for the International Student Week. And it was just amazing. I think it kind of encapsulated what you were just saying there, where, in any one moment in time, you can take a picture in time. And there must have been maybe 400 or 500 students, international students from all over the continent of Africa and Europe and various different places. And just the energy and the pride that there was in each student for their particular culture, their nationality, that type of thing. And given this platform for them to be able to kind of promote it and to teach other students, what it meant to be, from wherever you were, Zambia or South Africa or Namibia or whatever. They were cooking food, doing, national, regional dances and, clothes and fashion and all of this type of stuff. But it was really one of those moments in my life that I remember we were sitting and about 2 days afterwards, I still had a ringing in my ear because there was so much screaming and shouting at this fashion show that the students had. And it was really amazing. That energy has never really left me. When I start to talk about it, I still get it. So I understand what you mean when you say, if you could just capture that piece. But part of it, I think, is that we have to experience it, and
right.
That's one of the things I think a lot of people are grappling with at the moment is how do we deal with the situations that are going on in the world at the moment when a very, the quintessential piece of study abroad is that personal, in-person mobility, taking somebody out of their comfort zone and putting them into some place that is challenging for them, but they're experiencing something new. And, is there a dilution of that if you're not actually, if you don't have to leave your sitting room or your couch or your bed or wherever you are looking at your screen? And so I think this is something that's going on at the moment, which is a good segue, I guess, into the COVID-19 crisis and how that has manifested on Presbyterian College campus and what have you. So you're there 4 years, you're kind of there 3.5 years, something like that, and then suddenly this crisis comes on. What it's a small college. I think there's an enrollment of maybe 1,000 students, something like that.
Right.
And so you're a two-person office. So you're everything. And
right.
How did it manifest in PC? You're an important role. There isn't somebody else that can be delegated to. It's you, or nobody. So how did it all kind of play out from, say, February onwards, or whenever it really became really evident that there's a major crisis going on?
Well, I was aware of COVID-19 when it was just in China back in December 2019. And so as we moved into the spring semester, I started communicating with my students about what's happening in the world and just kind of giving them tidbits and information that was coming down from the CDC and from the State Department. And so it was just slow, and I was still pretty optimistic that things wouldn't get this bad. I was optimistic that our students could still stay abroad and our international students could stay here in the US without any issue. But then it rapidly progressed at the end of February into March. And so I actually had a trip down to Ecuador to visit one of our partners. And still, I didn't think that it would get this bad where we actually had to cancel the rest of our semester. And when I returned to the US, students were on spring break. So at least they were off campus, and it allowed the administration and the faculty and staff to kind of kick it into high gear in order to produce what we've done over the last couple of months in online curriculum courses, and also provide that extra support, that virtual support to students. But I think on the flip side, from the student perspective, it was just shocking. It was abrupt. It wasn't expected. As for any of us, it wasn't expected. And so just thinking about it from a student perspective, a lot of our students are food insecure. They don't have the necessary conditions in order to do a virtual experience or work online. And so we're having to think through that in the last couple of months. And it wasn't perfect. However, we were still able to get students safely off campus, or keep them safely off campus, until we were able to figure out whether we were going to transition from a hybrid model of half online, half in person, or just fully online. And so with my office, we did a number of things to make sure our students were supported, but also that they got back home safely or they returned to the US safely. And we communicated often enough so we knew what they were doing, how they were doing, and what they were planning. Because what we didn't want them to do, or what to happen, was for them to get sick, have to remain in the US or remain in their countries, their host countries, for a period of time, and when they didn't have like the external support that they needed. And so that went into communicating with our partners regularly to get them repatriation flights back home, or taking them to the airport to get flights when that period of travel was open and the borders were open for their countries or whatnot. And so it was rapid fire, like up 24 hours, working diligently with our campus partners. And my boss and I, we were always on the phone texting each other when we will see a news or a headline saying, this is what's happening in the world, because it affected our students, no matter if they were here in the US or abroad. And what we did, unlike other institutions, especially those around in South Carolina, like the major ones, Clemson, USC, Furman, Wofford, we decided to let our students to remain abroad during the COVID-19 crisis. We gave them the opportunity and the choice to remain abroad because we have such low numbers. We don't have 300 students abroad. And so after speaking with the students, speaking with their parents, they made the decision to remain in their countries, and because they felt safe. And we really, really, truly value and believe our partners have the capability to take care of our students even in their host countries. And so 2 remained behind, and 1 we actually returned home this week. And after speaking with them, they have so many positive things to say about their host country. And I tell them that they have a testimony to share with others about seeing a country pre-COVID and then seeing it post-COVID, or at least after the lockdowns that they've experienced. And so it's been a number of things and challenges and things that we've had to overcome in the last few months, but I'm very, very proud of my office for being the kind of the glue in the international component, getting the students back home and getting the students to come back to the US, and then making sure that they feel supported, that we're also catering to their grief, catering to the emotions that they're feeling, and that we're the experts on the reentry phase. So we're the experts on that component of transitioning from one culture to the next. And I would argue that right now there's a cultural component when it comes to pre-COVID and post-COVID. Our life pre-COVID is different from our post-COVID, or like the during COVID. And so that our transitioning back or transitioning to a new norm is where we can fit in and actually help our institutions and guide them through that transition phase.
Which countries were the students in that they decided to remain?
Spain.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because it seems to have been one of the most intense lockdowns, and we had a situation with one of our students who it was unforeseen, I guess. The student themselves did not have healthcare in the States, and so they were covered when they were here in Ireland, but not in the States, and so they felt safer staying here than they would have if they had went home. Ultimately, their institution called them back, but it was a really kind of a stark realization that you would prefer to stay over here away from friends and family and those types of things because you are worried that if you go back, you won't be able to access any kind of healthcare. And now this is a whole other conversation to be had. It's not the purpose of this podcast, but it's interesting when you see the different individual challenges that people have that really kind of surface when you have a crisis just like COVID, and so you had a student that returned this week from Spain as lockdowns have been lifted, and that's quite interesting that they would have kind of ridden it out in their host country. Obviously, I suppose staying in daily contact with friends and family and those types of things. But that is definitely a story that needs to be told. What that student's experience was. I think I've quite a few friends and partners and things in Spain, and have had a good interaction with them, and I think I have a general sense of the types of experiences that they had. I think they were a little bit more strict than we have been here in Ireland, but for a student, what a study abroad experience. One would hope that it doesn't stop them from studying abroad again, and that's just that the first time I studied abroad, this amazing experience happened, and largely a negative situation. And hopefully in years to come, this is just one of many stories they have to tell.
Exactly. And going back to your point about students, not having healthcare here in the U.S., but over in his host country, my one student, she didn't want to come back because her father has health conditions that she didn't want to expose him to anything, coronavirus or whatnot. And so she decided to remain abroad just so that this could pass and she wouldn't infect or cause harm to her father. And so again, like when you look at the individual circumstances, you realize like this is not something we can just dump in one group or another and just think that all solutions can apply to all parties, and that's not the truth. And with our students as a whole, it exposed some of the challenges and some of the things that honestly as a college we should know, right? So some of our students having not having the food or having food or the support back home to remain home to do the online experience or to take classes online, and whether they have Wi-Fi or internet or they have a space to go to focus on work. And so that exposed a lot of things and a lot of cracks for not only PC, but for institutions around the nation, as well as our governments. And so it is an opportunity for us to grow and to fix those cracks and to really fill the gaps that weren't, I won't say exposed or visible, but I would say put to the back burner, or we just didn't recognize at the time.
That inequality in experience for students, from low-income families that don't have access to internet, or as you say, just even a safe space to study. That just their house is small, they have many people in it, and there is no space that they can own and to be able to concentrate. And it's the initial knee-jerk reaction, oh no, we need to get everything online quick and everybody can consume it because everybody has one of these, and that type of thing. It's not as simple as that. The complexities are much deeper and much more numerous than I think the initial thought process was. So, but I think I like your approach to it. You know, it's a problem, it's an issue, and it's been highlighted here, and we need to move positively towards ways of facilitating it. So, you know, for example, you know, what were the conversations in Presbyterian College and around those students that, you know, that are experiencing food poverty or you know, kind of lack of internet or those types of things? You know, what did you guys discuss? Is there any way that the college can help, or what are your thoughts?
Our religious life and multicultural office really put together care packages for our students who were or are still food insecure, as well as who needed that extra support and needed that extra guidance through this time. And for those who didn't have the safe space back home to study, they remained on campus through the end of the semester. So a lot of our international students who couldn't go home because of closed borders or unable to get home, get a flight back home, were able to remain on campus and provided food, water, and then shelter during that time so that they can get through their classes and move on afterwards when it was deemed fit for them to leave the country. So it was a number of things our partners and our office did to step up in order to support those students. And while for some students, it didn't clear everything or resolve everything for them, at least we got them to the point where they were able to finish out the semester on a good note. And then also for them to get the items and the food or the things that they needed to make it through the day and make it through this time.
It's great to see the rally around when something like that happens, and for an institution to be able to be that provider for its students. It's more than just delivering education, it's really looking out for them as a whole and as people.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate that. You were talking about, you know, the very quick transition to courses online in the last couple of months, and assuming that's the same over summer and what have you. We see in the last couple of days this California State University system has decided that they are going online for the fall, which is obviously a big call. You know, you're talking about, I think it's 500,000 plus students, and obviously who knows how many faculty and how many courses that now need to be transitioned across and those types of things. So obviously they need to make a call with a certain amount of time to be able to facilitate that. What's happening in Presbyterian College? It's a small, single, individual, private college, so it's a very different situation. But I'm interested to hear, you know, have those decisions been made, and if they had, what does that mean on campus in terms of a knock-on effect to you and your colleagues?
It hasn't been made at this moment. We put together, well, at least administration put together a working group so that we can make those decisions and work through what students need, what will faculty and staff need in order to come back to campus and not only be there, but feel safe on campus. And so while we haven't made the decision, we are definitely hearing from our network and from, you know, the news and the media that different institutions are deciding to go online in the fall. What that looks like and how people feel for students, they may not like that model because they want the in-person experience, and just based off of this last semester's online experience, it seems that the overwhelming majority or a lot of students didn't like or didn't get much out of the online experience. And so they have like a negative feeling towards going online for the full fall semester. As faculty and staff, and I'll speak for myself, I can't speak for my colleagues, but for me there needs to be a transition period between spring, summer, and then the fall semester. Not just the transition in terms of moving things on campus, but the emotional transition. After having to deal with this COVID-19 and the crisis and the pandemic, what does it look like having to return to a campus where you prematurely left from in the previous semester? What does that look like for you? Will we be able to have a classroom of 10 to 15 students in it? Would you need to sit 6 feet away from each other? What would that look like for classes and courses? And I know there's been conversation about instead of using classes inside of buildings, having classes outside, maybe in our lawns, in our outdoor spaces, separating students so they can have, just a good distance between them, still practicing that physical distance. But also, what does programming look like for my office, and as well as our multicultural office, religious life office, student involvement, Do we create online programming? So I actually have more questions than answers at this moment, but these are things that we're thinking through in order to decide whether we will have a fall semester or not. And then the biggest question is about our financial model as an institution. Can we still be PC in the fall if we were to have an online semester? And the short answer is no. We benefit off of the room and board, the tuition and fees from our students. And so if we decide to do an online model, will we be PC after the fall semester? And those are real questions that we have to answer, because if we don't, then we can really get to the point in August where we're drastically running around trying to figure out how to create this experience for students on campus when we actually cannot. Or the concern may be if we hit a spike here in South Carolina with COVID-19 cases, do we tell our students to stay home? Would they want to? Would they drop out, withdraw, or take a gap year, a gap semester? So to be honest, there's no answers at the moment, but these are questions that are swirling around campus, swirling around the staff and the faculty in our meetings, because it is simply an unknown and uncertain time for us to decide that. And then whether we will have a job by the end of summer, so more questions
It's
and
interesting.
answers.
Yeah. Look, I mean, so much that I really like your insight. I like the way that you are concerned not only about your own office, but your colleagues' office, other student support offices on campus, and those types of things. And it just is a good window into how PC works as an institution. I mean, I visited a number of times myself, and it's a small community, relatively speaking, in terms of higher education, and everybody knows each other. And so what you've hit on there, a point that we haven't really discussed hugely with many people in the podcast so far, which is the economics behind the economic output or lack thereof, the economic consequences of COVID-19. And from a provider's perspective, where I am, it's a great leveler. It's everybody is having issues. So it's the same with the institutions. It doesn't matter the size. You have a certain overhead, and that needs to be paid for, and that means you need to generate revenue and those types of things. And so whether you're a one-person entity or you're a 20,000-person entity, the economic systems work similarly enough. Money in one side, money out the other, and a little bit is left behind. That's kind of it. There's your economics 101. And so anyway, I jest, but it was something that I had originally thought about chatting a little bit about. But, we probably don't have the ins and the outs of it, but in general, there is a fight for existence and sustaining, organizations of a similar size, I suppose, and profile of Presbyterian College, even before COVID-19 came out, in terms of declining enrollments and, the number of students that are paying full fees relative to scholarships and various different things. And so it becomes a really important question very quickly, within a semester or 2 semesters, depending on the amount of cash an institution has to be able to fall back on, in whether, as you say, are we going to be PC next year? Are we going to be anything in 12 months time or 24 months time? Are we a bunch of closed buildings that used to be a university, which is a really scary thing to think about, And I think unlocking that or unpacking that emotional transition, not just from the students' perspective, but from the staff's perspective, because the institution is the staff and the students, but really it's the staff that drive it along. And it's a bunch of people that have bought into the ideals of what an institution is and are maintaining that and accepting nothing less than the standard that is expected at PC. And so I don't know if you have more to say about it, but I'd love to hear about, emotionally, how are you feeling that your institution is challenged,
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I talk with my boss often about the feeling and the emotions behind whether we will have a job by the end of the summer, or even at all in the next year. And I actually talked to a colleague last night about the same thing. And it's basically, for us, we're all on the same level, that we don't know what the future holds, whether we will have a job by the end of summer going into the fall. And it's scary because you, as a professional in this field or professional in higher ed, education is what we know. We want to support and educate our students, but at the same time, we have families to feed ourselves and people at home to support too. And so for me, I've been battling emotions. I've been an emotional roller coaster the last couple of months because, on some days I'm really very optimistic and focused and I'm here for students. And other days when I look at the news and I'm on social media, which is simply not something that you should do too often, especially if you are focusing on your self-care, it is I'm very, very low. I'm very, very disappointed. I'm anxious. I'm weary about the future. And so it's hard to kind of deal with those emotions and not really address them when you yourself don't know the answer. So for me, because there's like this vague and this ambiguity as to what will happen in the future, it's kind of like I'm stuck in this bubble. And so while I try to fight out of it every single day, I'm right back in it at the end of the day, because again, I wake up and I wonder, is this my last day? Will I have a job in the future? Can I even go to another company or provider or institution in the field that I'm in? Or do I need to transition to another field altogether, another industry altogether? And so my answers at the end of the day is different based off of, I'm going to transition to another field or another industry. But at the end of the day, my passion is here. My passion is to encourage people to see the world. And again, it's a scary time, but I think it's also an important time for us to shake up the complacency that we've probably been in and just kind of think creatively about what the future holds, or think creatively about the model that PC has, or think creatively about how we support students or how we support our staff, or what the future of international education should be or could be, or how that can be a model different than what we've used in the last few decades.
I love the way you express yourself. I really appreciate how open and honest you are about that bubble. I know that bubble. I'm in that bubble right now myself.
Yeah.
I feel it, that, you feel like you're progressing and then suddenly you wake up again and it's like Groundhog Day, you're back to square one. And, that uncertainty still hangs over you. It's like a spiral right there. And you just don't know, because we're the same. We don't know whether we will have a company in a few months' time, and therefore jobs and things like that. And that's just the reality, and you have to be okay with it. But it's a good segue into, in our prep talk, there was a moment in time when you started talking about something and I said, oh, this is amazing and we need to talk about it. And you're talking about the uncertainty and, your mental health essentially and how that uncertainty feeds into that and negatively. Tell me a little bit, just talk to me a little bit more about that and how you counteract it, how do you stay positive, those types of things.
Well, for me is not pushing through or toughing it out. For me is to strategically stop. So if I'm feeling very anxious, if my chest is getting a little tight and my mind is wandering and I'm feeling like I should run 100 miles per hour, I have to stop. I know that's my cue to stop. And so sometimes I'll take a day off in the middle of the week. Typically, if I'm working and I'm on campus in my office, obviously I can't take a day off in the middle of the week. But here at home, I can say, you know what, Wednesday, I'm going to take off and not do anything. I'm not going to focus on emails. I'm not going to answer any emails. Obviously, if my boss calls, I will pick up. But I was simply just shut everything off that is causing that anxiety. And then focusing on things that make me happy. So if that's coloring, if that's watching a movie I love, if that's playing with my dogs, going out and breathing the fresh air, working out, just engaging in activities that make me smile, make me happy. Because throughout that period and throughout that day, my anxiety tends to decrease and decline. And then by the end of it, I feel so relaxed. I feel so rejuvenated. It's kind of like the experience you get when you go to a spa, a massage therapist. Like they relax, they work out the kinks and the knots and whatnot. And by the end of it, like you're as if you're floating on clouds, like you're floating in the air, like you feel so relaxed. And so for me, by the end of the day, I feel so rejuvenated. My spirit is is leveled, and I'm not focused on the things that make me anxious. So when I go into the next day, go into Thursday, I have a clearer head. I can focus on things and address them as needed and not have to focus on 100 things all at once. So for my advice to those who are listening is to strategically stop. Just stop. Just simply stop. Put it away. And something I learned back when I was an educator in Miami, my colleague said, basically, that work is still going to be there tomorrow. So I'll just leave it for tomorrow.
I've done that twice in the last 3 weeks. But it wasn't premeditated. I had I hit a wall, and I needed to. I just couldn't do anything. I would sit for hours, and I would have done 10 minutes work in an hour and a half. And as far as I was concerned, I was working, but I wasn't just producing at all. And that's the point when you've hit a wall, and you need to just shut everything off. And this strategically stopping idea, I think, is a brilliant idea. And I think what people grapple with is this guilt. That I'm lucky enough to have a job. There is still lots that need to be done, and we have to try and do our scenario planning and plan ABC and all of that type of stuff for the future. But there is very, very, I don't think it's very rare, but it's certainly a minimum amount of your daily output is so time critical that it needs to be done by tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And there will always be a massive to-do list until the day that we all check out of this rock. There will be a massive to-do list. And so the ability to say, I need this time for me, and all of this to-do list can just wait until tomorrow or the next day or whatever it is. And I will be much more fresh. I just think that I love that idea. I love the strategic stopping, and owning your own mental health. So, along that line, so what other things are you personally looking at? We had spoken a little bit about the extra time that's here, giving you an ability to kind of look, put the head above and look around and what else are you doing with the time that you have from COVID?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I do have another idea for those who feel like they have a big old to-do list, and that's to brain dump. So just kind of dump everything off your mind, because it's just rolling around in your brain and you have no place to go, and it's just lingering there. Just put it all on paper, like dump it out, make it a list as to what category it fits in. I have my job brain dump, personal things I need to do, and other ideas and creative, a creative avenue I put my list in. And then basically what I do is schedule them out in a way where I don't feel like I have 100 things to do. That's not being productive. Like checking off things every 15 minutes, unless you are that person who needs to do so. But if you have big goals, I definitely think creating smaller tasks towards that goal will eventually ease some of the anxiety and get you towards what you want to accomplish. So brain dumping is something I do, especially if I take a day off or a period where I've just taken time for myself and not thinking about work, because it allows me to, again, free that space in my head and just focus on the task at hand. So to your question, I have in the past couple of months tried to look at different ways to either hone my skills or think outside of the international education box. And this is still travel related, still in the travel industry. I've taken a certificate course from the Florida Atlantic University Business School of Travel and Hospitality Management. And so I did a 3-week course, and I've done it in 3 days, but I did an online course. And it was interesting because some terms and some things I knew, and there's others I didn't. And not coming from a background of working in a hotel or working in a restaurant, and it's things that we can incorporate in our office or incorporate in our skill set, so that we can make ourselves more complete professionals, complete customer service representatives for our college. And so that was pretty unique and pretty incredible, just because, again, like, you have this opportunity to get these certificates and get this extra training while you're not physically present or you're not at your job. And I know for my office, especially, that professional development may be nixed because of the finances and cuts to our operating budget. So I'm having to look at different avenues and different places in order to get that professional development. And online courses and education at different institutions is one way I found that I can just up my game and up my skill sets. And then I know Harvard and other institutions have offered some of their courses for free. So I would definitely take a look at what they're offering and see how you can fit that into what you want to do in the future, whether you remain a professional in the field or not. And that for me, I also taken inspiration from watching certain Netflix shows. And I think it's just assessing internally, how do I want to be seen by the community, be seen by other people. So having, assessing my true purpose and my true focus. And so, I mean, I've taken inspiration from different places, and I've been able to just kind of focus on being a better person besides being a better professional. So it goes hand in hand, but at the same time, building myself up, my confidence up in order to support my community and the people around me and my colleagues.
It's really inspirational hearing you speak about that. I mean that sincerely. Going back to your brain dump idea, I think that's brilliant. I started doing that. I don't know, was it Tim Robbins or one of those inspirational speakers that kind of coined the idea. I had discovered this. We use Gmail in work, and I discovered the tasks list on the side. It just looks like a little pen, and it's open all the time. And so something comes into my head, I just type it in there. Right. It's so simple. It can tweak it to you can add it to your calendar if you want to, but I just leave it as a list there. And when I do something, I click it and it's gone. Mm-hmm. and that's it. So you can kind of have it kind of, should I say, save and those types of things, but I don't. It's that brain dump. So I know then that everything is there. So I can stop worrying about it, because when I have my time to work on, I have my rocks, and then I have my email time, and then I have okay, now I give an hour or 2 hours to building down this list, and I'll go through it and say, okay, these are my priorities now. So I totally agree with you on that. Shifting to your focus on personal development, and in its purest form, not just professionally, but as a person. That's certainly I would mirror that. I think from the start of COVID-19 is to come out the other side as a different professional, as a different person. If you have an organization, hopefully it's a different organization. But that just can't be lip service. You actually have to go and do something about it. You have to go onto Harvard and look for those courses, or decide what it is. I really like the idea of the cross-disciplinary piece. So you're looking at a different subsector and looking at what are the skill sets that a good hotel manager or restaurant manager or kitchen manager or whatever it is, and are there ones that we can transfer across to our office, and how we work? Does it logically, will it fit? I think now is the time to think about all of those types of things. So I'm really inspired by having chatted to you about what you're doing, and it's a personal thing at the end of the day. Just like the way we get through this as a, hashtag we're all in this together, is really, we are all in this together, but it's an individual effort for us to stay away from each other, to wear masks, to do what we need to do from the point of view of COVID. It's also an individual effort to make sure that we are working towards being a better person or being a better professional. And we could sit down and make another bowl of popcorn and just watch Netflix all day long if we wanted to. And some days that's okay, but what you want to be able to do is to come out the other side and look back on the 6 months of the year that was COVID, hopefully, and say, gosh, I used that time well. I'm here now, I started there, and that's it. So well, you mentioned that you're taking your inspiration from Netflix. Tell us, so we can also get this wonderful inspiration. What are you watching?
Well, so I've been watching a lot of international TV shows and movies, and so when I was working, I didn't watch Netflix often. I didn't watch Hulu or any of the online TV platforms often. I was more online on my computer, but now that I have time to kind of search through and find good movies, I've watched a lot of British shows, a lot of movies and shows from France and South America. But some of my favorite shows I've watched, one I'm watching currently is called Restaurants on Their Edge. It is a food, kind of like a mix between Gordon Ramsay's show where he helps improve a business with exploring the world. And so it's unique because you really put yourself in the shoes of these participants who are on the show to kind of share their business, their stories, and how to help improve their business. And you say to yourself, what am I missing? Yesterday, I was telling my mom, like, sometimes I put myself in these shoes and I say, like, so focused, you're so tunnel vision, you forget all the common sense or some of the very, the answers that seem so simple. And so I put myself in those shoes and I say, what am I missing? Like, what can I do instantly that will benefit such a big group of people? And so as you watch each episode, you get to learn more about the culture, the country, the food, but also about yourself, because you say, I see myself in this person, and you explain, you think through why exactly, and then you assess and evaluate what you can do differently in your own personal life or professional life. And I recommend anyone who's in IE to watch the show. You may not be a design lover or may not be a foodie or whatnot, but I think is unique for our office to kind of explore the internationalization through food and through music. And some of the stories are so powerful. Yesterday, there was one about the combination of wine and frequencies and good vibes. And I'm like, yes, that makes so much sense. But if we weren't in that space, or we weren't watching, we would never connect the two. So I think there's inspiration in that particular show, especially because we are people who are in the international space. And some other shows, I love detective shows, kind of mysteries, murder mysteries and whatnot. And so I've been watching that. And it really comes back down to my background in criminology. So I feel like I'm a very good detective. Maybe not in practice, but definitely virtually and online. So I think it depends on what you're watching. And one last show I watched was The Circle. If you are an influencer, if you are in the marketing space, if you are branding yourself as a coach or whatnot on social media, definitely take a look at this one show, because it allows you to question, how are you showing up on social media and how people are interpreting who you are. And so as an international office and professionals, we can ask the same thing. How are we showing up on social media and how people are interpreting our presence? Are we visible enough? Are we sharing? Are we branding ourselves enough? Or is the branding communicating what we need to and want to our audience and to our students, faculty, and staff? And we can ask those questions from a kind of a marketing and macro level. So those are a couple of shows and things I've taken from Netflix that I've jotted down and taken mental notes as to assessing my own person, me as a person, but also myself as a professional.
Let me just ask one final question. From your perspective, what is the silver lining of having had to go through COVID?
So I've always learned to take the positive out of the negative or the situation that you're currently in. And for me, it's that we needed a refresh or a reset button, right? And so we are going to come out stronger than this. And I believe that wholeheartedly. And we are able, as an office, come through and show our strengths, our expertise more, especially being at a small college. It's easy to neglect what different offices can be utilized for, what their expertise is. So as an international office, we can show on a greater scale that we have more to offer than just to send students abroad and accept students to our office. And I think as a nation and as a world and as citizens and as people, I've seen people come out of this situation with more ideas and more of a fire to serve their community, serve their people in different ways. So whether that was creating the masks, whether that was creating products or services that people didn't know that they needed. And so it was really forcing us to think creatively and outside of the box. Like I said before, we probably got to a point where we were all complacent and just focusing on the easy, what we could do now and things that we're comfortable with. But this has taken us outside of our comfort zone, like extremely out of our comfort zone. And there's no diamond without a lot of pressure, right? And so I wholeheartedly believe that we will come out top. It may take us a little bit longer, but I think as we work together, we have these conversations and we focus on community, and also not just community in terms of like, hey, how are you? But more on like the self-care and cultivating that connection between all of us, then there's no wonder what we can do in another year or so.
Really, one of the main reasons for the podcast is to try and talk about, the need for positivity at the moment, and that can manifest in many ways. Personally, in your head, if you're somebody who's very introspective and, gets anxious because of a downward spiral of thought or those types of things, but also just as a team in an office, and then as a person in a family and person in society, and all of those types of things. And the thought that every single issue that we come upon, it's our own personal responsibility to decide, am I going to approach this from a negative perspective or a positive perspective? And sometimes it's so hard to just choose to come at it from a positive perspective. But the importance of that on a macro level as a society, and then on a micro level individually, every single one of them, it becomes easier as you do it. And I think that's part of what I want the podcast to be. So I'm so happy that we're kind of ending on that note, in that, there is a positive that's coming out of this, and it's very, very much malleable, and it's something that we can affect positive change for on an individual basis, that everybody will feel. So I love that. I love that sentiment to end on. So I just want to say, look, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for chatting with us so openly. We've talked about so many different things. I personally am taking quite a bit away from it. I again, part of the podcast is to show people that, a lot of people are experiencing the same thing. That bubble analogy is definitely something that I feel in the morning, waking up going, oh, here we go again, those types of things. And then you default to having to be positive about it, those types of things. But I want to say thanks so much, Adriana Smith, the Assistant Director of International Programming at Presbyterian College, and to the listeners at home, thanks very much for staying with us for this podcast. And please tune again next week, when we'll have somebody else from somewhere else in international education speaking about their experience and what's happening in their IE world at the time. So until then, please stay safe, stay home, and be kind.